The air at Los Angeles International Airport buzzed with urgency as passengers hurried through the gates. Flight 317 to Tokyo Narita was set to depart in an hour, and the first-class passengers were beginning to gather. Among them was Oliver Bennett, a man who wore his ego like a tailored suit. He was used to standing out. His software startup had recently hit a billion-dollar valuation, and his social media feed was a parade of self-congratulatory posts. "Disruption is my middle name," his latest caption read, beneath a photo of him raising a glass of champagne. "Mr. Bennett, welcome aboard," a flight attendant greeted warmly. Though polite, her forced smile hinted that she knew the type. Oliver nodded curtly and stepped into the plush first-class cabin, where each seat resembled a private pod with reclining features and a personal screen. Seat 2A, his home for the next 12 hours. He removed his blazer with a flourish, draped it over his seat, and retrieved his noise-canceling headphones. A glance at the seat beside him showed it was still vacant. Good, maybe I'll get some peace for once. Moments later, a figure appeared, slipping into seat 2B. His attire, a plain hoodie and well-worn sneakers, was a stark contrast to Oliver's sharp, tailored ensemble. His face was shadowed by a baseball cap, and he moved with the quiet ease of someone accustomed to blending in. Oliver barely glanced up, focused on drafting yet another tweet for his 500,000 followers. "Evening," the man offered casually. "Yeah, sure," Oliver muttered without looking up. As the cabin doors closed and the engines roared to life, Oliver felt a twinge of curiosity. Something about the man seemed oddly familiar, but he couldn't place it. Probably just another tech guy trying to live the dream, he thought dismissively. A flight attendant walked by, offering champagne. The man declined, opting instead for a bottle of water. Oliver smirked to himself. "Water? Really? Might as well be in coach," he whispered loud enough for the man to hear. But the man said nothing, just offered a faint smile. At cruising altitude, Oliver's need to dominate the room kicked in. He finished his champagne in one gulp, placed the glass on the tray with a clink, and turned toward seat 2B. "So, what do you do?" Oliver asked, his tone dripping with forced interest. The man turned slightly, his face still partially hidden beneath his cap. "I'm in tech," he replied simply. Oliver grinned. "Ah, same here. Bet we've got some war stories to share." He leaned back, ready to steer the conversation toward his favorite topic, himself. But the man didn't bite. He only nodded lightly and returned to scrolling through his phone. Oliver wasn't used to being ignored. His curiosity morphed into irritation. "You know," he began, his voice loud enough to catch nearby attention, "the tech world is full of people who get way too much credit for half-baked ideas." He smirked before continuing. "Take Elon Musk, for example. Everyone's so busy calling him a genius, they forget how reckless he is." The man in 2B paused, his finger hovering over his phone screen, but he didn't look up. Encouraged by the lack of response, Oliver kept going. "SpaceX? Sure, if you like throwing billions at exploding rockets. Tesla? Overrated. And don't even get me started on Twitter. That whole takeover? A disaster." A faint chuckle escaped from C2B. It was almost imperceptible, but it lit a fire in Oliver. He leaned forward, ready to hammer his point home. "You think I'm wrong?" he challenged. "No," the man said, his voice calm, almost amused. "I think you're passionate." Oliver frowned. Was that a compliment or an insult? "Passionate? I call it realistic. People like Musk just ride the wave of hype, nothing more." The man finally looked up, sharp, observant eyes, unmistakable. Then, before Oliver could process it, a flight attendant approached with an air of formality. "Excuse me, Mr. Musk," she said respectfully. "The captain wanted me to let you know your connection in Tokyo is confirmed." Silence. The words didn't register at first. "Mr. Musk?" Oliver's stomach dropped. The hoodie, the quiet confidence, the baseball cap, it wasn't just anyone sitting beside him. It was Elon Musk. Oliver's face burned as the realization hit him like a freight train. He had spent the last hour loudly tearing into the man himself, thinking he was safe behind his own arrogance. Passengers who had pretended not to eavesdrop exchanged knowing glances. Oliver cleared his throat. "So, you're Elon Musk." Elon closed his book, placing it gently on his tray. "That's what they tell me." Oliver fumbled for his drink, taking a long sip. I didn't mean anything by what I said earlier. Just, talking." Elon tilted his head slightly, studying Oliver. Then, with a small, knowing smile, he said, "Don't worry, I don't." The tension in the cabin was thick. For the rest of the flight, Oliver sat uncharacteristically quiet, his mind replaying every word he had said. Meanwhile, Elon Musk, he simply returned to his book, completely unbothered. The lesson was clear. It's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but the real challenge? Stepping up, understanding, and creating real change. The hum of the engines filled the cabin as first-class passengers settled into their routines, some reading, others watching movies or sipping cocktails. Oliver Bennett, however, was far from relaxed. His irritation festered as the man in seat 2B remained quiet, offering only the occasional smirk or short reply to Oliver's increasingly pointed remarks. Oliver thrived on being the center of attention, and his seatmate's lack of engagement felt like an affront to his ego. "Let me guess," Oliver said, unable to help himself. "You're one of those startup guys? Something in crypto or AI, right? Everyone's jumping on those bandwagons these days." The man looked up briefly, his expression unreadable. "Not exactly," he replied. The ambiguity only fueled Oliver's irritation. "You're in tech, though," Oliver pressed, his voice sharper now. "So what's your take on Musk? You must have an opinion." The man hesitated for a moment before shrugging. "He's done some interesting things." Oliver scoffed, laughing. "Interesting things? That's the understatement of the century. The guy's a walking contradiction, preaching about saving the planet while flying private jets, hyping up the future of Mars while barely addressing problems here on Earth." For the first time, a flicker of something crossed the man's face, amusement perhaps, or mild irritation. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Maybe he's just doing what he thinks is best," the man replied simply, his tone neutral. Oliver rolled his eyes. "Spoken like someone who's never actually dealt with real-world consequences. It's all theory until you're the one footing the bill." Before the man could respond, a flight attendant arrived with their dinner orders, interrupting the tension. The man in 2B ordered a simple vegetarian meal, while Oliver chose a steak, medium rare. As the plates were placed before them, Oliver noticed how calmly his seatmate ate, as though he had all the time in the world. "Must be nice," Oliver muttered under his breath, not having a care in the world. The man glanced at him, but said nothing, focusing instead on his meal. As the hours passed, Oliver's curiosity about his seatmate grew. There was a quiet confidence about him, an understated presence that Oliver couldn't quite figure out. He didn't seem intimidated by Oliver's critiques or baited by his arrogance. And then there were the whispers. The flight attendants glanced at 2B with a mix of curiosity and respect. One even addressed him softly. "Let me know if you need anything, sir." Oliver noticed this and frowned. Who is this guy? He leaned forward, pretending to adjust his seat. The man's face was still partially obscured by his baseball cap, but something about his jawline and the way he carried himself nagged at Oliver. As the cabin lights dimmed and passengers settled in for the long haul, Oliver let it go. Just some eccentric rich guy, he thought. Nothing more. He put on his headphones and reclined his seat, missing the subtle glance his seatmate gave him, a look that hinted at something far beyond what Oliver could imagine. The hours passed, and the cabin remained quiet, except for the occasional clinking of glasses and rustle of blankets. Several drinks in, Oliver felt loose and emboldened. He scanned the cabin for any new distractions, but his gaze landed once again on seat 2B. He sighed dramatically. "All right," Oliver said, breaking the silence between them. "I give up. You've got to tell me. What's your deal? You've been sitting there all calm and mysterious." The man chuckled softly but remained focused on his book. Oliver persisted. "Let me guess? Venture capitalist? Eccentric trust fund kid?" The man smiled but said nothing. Then a flight attendant approached 2B with an air of formality. "Excuse me, Mr. Musk," she said, her voice respectful. Oliver's breath caught in his throat. "Mr. Musk?" The pieces clicked into place, the hoodie, the quiet confidence, the unassuming demeanor. It wasn't just anyone sitting next to him. It was Elon Musk. Oliver's face flushed crimson. His mind replayed every word he had said, every insult, every smug comment. He had spent the entire flight trashing one of the most brilliant minds in tech, thinking he was just another nobody. The surrounding passengers, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, exchanged subtle glances. Oliver cleared his throat. "So, you're Elon Musk." Elon closed his book, placing it gently on his tray table. That's what they tell me, he said, his voice light but edged with humor. Oliver fumbled for his drink, taking a long sip. I didn't mean anything by what I said earlier. Just, talking. Elon tilted his head slightly, studying Oliver. Then, with a small, knowing smile, he said, Don't worry, I don't. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. For the remainder of the flight, Oliver was uncharacteristically quiet, his mind racing. Elon, on the other hand, simply returned to his book, completely unbothered. The lesson was clear. It's easy to criticize from the sidelines. The real challenge? Stepping up, understanding, and creating change. Oliver leaned in, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. All right, he said, his voice laced with playful arrogance. You've been sitting here all calm and mysterious. Let me guess, you're some venture capitalist or an eccentric trust fund kid? The man chuckled softly, his eyes never leaving the pages of his book. Close, he replied, offering no further explanation. Oliver wasn't satisfied. Come on, he pushed, his voice carrying a hint of challenge. You can't just sit here like some enigma and not spill a little. For the first time, the man looked up, meeting Oliver's gaze directly. His eyes were sharp, observant, and suddenly familiar. Oliver felt a flicker of recognition, but before he could piece it together, a flight attendant approached their row with an air of formality. Excuse me, Mr. Musk, she said, her voice respectful yet professional. The captain wanted me to inform you that your connection in Tokyo is confirmed. They'll be ready for you upon landing. Oliver froze. The words didn't register at first, as if his brain needed a moment to process. Mr. Musk. The man in seat 2B nodded politely. Thank you, he said, his tone warm but understated. The pieces clicked into place with a jarring finality. The hoodie, the quiet confidence, the unassuming demeanor, it wasn't just anyone sitting next to him. It was Elon Musk. Oliver's mouth went dry, his heart thudding in his chest as he replayed the last few hours in his mind. Every insult, every critique, every mocking jab, all directed at the very man he had assumed was just another nobody. For the first time on the flight, Oliver was utterly speechless. Elon Musk adjusted his cap slightly and turned back to his book, as if nothing had happened. But Oliver's discomfort was palpable. The bravado he had flaunted earlier crumbled under the weight of sheer humiliation. The surrounding passengers, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, exchanged subtle glances. Their expressions were a mix of amusement and second-hand embarrassment. Oliver cleared his throat, desperate to regain his composure. So, you're Elon Musk? Elon closed his book, placing it gently on his tray table. That's what they tell me, he said, his tone light but edged with humor. Oliver's face flushed crimson. I didn't mean anything by what I said earlier. Just, talking. You can't take these things personally. Elon tilted his head slightly, studying Oliver with an expression that was impossible to read. Then, with a small smile, he said, Don't worry, I don't. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Oliver fumbled for his drink, taking a long sip in a vain attempt to steady his nerves. Elon, on the other hand, seemed utterly unfazed, exuding a calm that only heightened Oliver's discomfort. Desperate to claw his way out of the hole he had dug, Oliver tried again. You're probably used to people criticizing you, right? Comes with the territory. Elon leaned back, his expression thoughtful. I suppose, he said. But I've always believed criticism is useful, as long as it's constructive. He glanced at Oliver, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Was yours constructive? Oliver shifted in his seat, suddenly feeling very small. I guess I didn't look at it that way. Elon nodded slightly, then continued. You mentioned Tesla, he said, his voice calm but deliberate. Do you know how many lives have been saved by our driver assistance technology? How many people avoided accidents because of features we've implemented? Oliver opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Elon's gaze remained unwavering. And SpaceX, he continued, you called it reckless. Did you know our rockets have reduced the cost of access to space by over 90%? That we're developing technologies that could one day protect humanity from extinction-level events? Oliver swallowed hard. I didn't know that. Elon's expression softened slightly. And Twitter? He added. Yes, it's chaotic. But sometimes chaos is necessary for change. Ideas evolve through friction. Without it, there's no progress. The entire first-class cabin seemed to hold its breath. Elon's words weren't angry or defensive. They were simply factual, delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything. Oliver sat back in his seat, his mind racing. For all his bravado and arrogance, he had been so eager to belittle and dismiss that he never stopped to consider the impact of Musk's work. As the plane began its descent into Tokyo, the atmosphere remained tense. Oliver, still reeling from the humbling moment, glanced at Elon, unsure of what to say. Finally, he whispered, "Hey, Mr. Musk." Elon looked up, his expression neutral but attentive. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I was out of line. It's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but I can't imagine the weight of doing what you do." Elon studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Apology accepted," he said simply. "It's not easy, but that's the nature of progress. You're always going to face resistance, especially from people who don't see the full picture. The key is to keep moving forward." Oliver nodded, his throat tight. For once, he had nothing clever to say. As the plane touched down, Elon turned to him one last time. "Good luck with your work," he said, offering a small smile. "I hope it's something that makes a difference." Oliver watched as Elon disappeared into the crowd of passengers. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Humility. He wasn't sure what he'd do with this newfound perspective, but one thing was certain. He couldn't go back to being the man he was when he boarded that plane. The lesson was clear. It's easy to criticize. The real challenge lies in understanding and creating change. The entire first-class cabin seemed to hold its breath. Elon's words weren't angry or defensive. They were simply factual, delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything. Oliver swallowed hard. "Look, I didn't mean to. I didn't think you'd be here." Elon leaned forward slightly, his expression gentle but firm. "The truth doesn't change based on who's listening," he said. "Maybe next time, consider that before you speak." It wasn't said harshly, but it hit Oliver harder than any insult ever could. He sat back in his seat, suddenly feeling very small in the vast expanse of the first-class cabin. For the remainder of the flight, Oliver was uncharacteristically quiet. His mind churned, replaying every word he had said, every smug comment, every insult, all aimed directly at the man sitting inches from him. He felt a mix of embarrassment, regret, and a strange sense of respect. Meanwhile, Elon returned to his book, as if the confrontation had been nothing more than a fleeting conversation. Occasionally, a flight attendant would approach him with quiet professionalism, offering subtle gestures of deference that now made perfect sense to Oliver. The humbling moment weighed on Oliver like a stone in his chest. This wasn't just about being caught in a moment of arrogance. It was about realizing how little he truly understood the people and ideas he had so casually dismissed. As the cabin lights dimmed and most passengers drifted off to sleep, Oliver hesitated. Then, gathering his courage, he leaned over and whispered, "Hey, Mr. Musk." Elon looked up, his expression neutral but attentive. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Oliver's voice was low, careful not to disturb the quiet cabin. His words carried a weight of sincerity he wasn't used to expressing. "I was out of line," he admitted. "It's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but I can't imagine the weight of doing what you do." Elon studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. Apology accepted. His voice was calm and even, carrying neither judgment nor resentment. "It's not easy," he continued, "but that's the nature of progress. You're always going to face resistance, especially from people who don't see the full picture. The key is to keep moving forward." Oliver nodded, his throat tight. For once, he had nothing clever to say. As the plane began its descent into Tokyo, the cabin came alive with the sound of passengers stirring and preparing for arrival. Oliver stared out the window, watching the city lights grow brighter as the plane approached the runway. He thought about all the times he had dismissed people like Elon Musk, visionaries who dared to think bigger, risk more, and tackle problems others wouldn't even attempt. In his quest to seem knowledgeable, he had ignored the courage it took to face constant criticism while pursuing something meaningful. As they disembarked, Elon turned to Oliver one last time. "Good luck with your work," he said, offering a small, knowing smile. "I hope it's something that makes a difference." Oliver watched as Elon disappeared into the crowd, flanked by discreet airport personnel who whisked him away toward his next endeavor. For the first time in years, Oliver felt something unfamiliar: humility. He wasn't sure what he would do with this newfound perspective, but he knew one thing. He couldn't go back to being the man he was when he boarded that plane.